Hello, Future Tribe. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. On this episode, we're doing something, again, a little bit different. I've got Hayden Fitzgerald with me. How are you today, Hayden?
Yeah, real good, Germaine. Real good.
Thanks for joining. This is a bit of a special sort of episode. I know we had a special episode about, what would it be, 7 or 8 episodes ago? With sort of celebrating the big 5-0, the half century. But on this episode, we're actually celebrating a year since we started the podcast, which has been awesome, and you've been there from the start.
Yeah.
It's all about, I guess, talking, looking back into the podcast itself, podcasting in general, and then, we'll start it off with talking about what we do at Futuretheory. The podcast for us was really another way of marketing. It's another medium. Everyone's familiar with videography. Podcasting's taking on its own sort of thing around the world, but not so much in Australia yet, I feel like.
I feel like podcast consumption is still really big in Australia, but in terms of podcast creators, no. A lot of people, or a lot of podcasts I listen to don't actually get created in Australia.
Yeah, so it's sort of, we are consuming a lot of international podcasts,
which I guess is true for a lot of like entertainment media, but especially for podcasts, I would say.
Yeah, it's podcasting has started to really hit mainstream in the last year or so with Spotify purchasing Anchor, and Joe Rogan signed.
Yeah, so Joe Rogan signed, I believe it was a $200 million deal to basically go exclusive with Spotify, which is pretty common. I mean, other podcasts, entertainment ones specifically, have signed pretty big deals like that. So, yeah, it's not surprising, but it is interesting to see like a dollar tag put to, the worth of podcasts. And yeah, it's interesting for the creators. It definitely gives a lot of, power to them and how much they can expect to get from ad revenue and stuff. But we'll get into that later.
A little bit later on. But I guess before we get into it, the big thing that we want to talk about was, at Futuretheory, we do marketing, we build websites. We're always looking and experimenting with what's coming up or what's next, and trying to, I guess, be as much ahead of the curve as possible. And part of that is it's just the importance of marketing, obviously being so marketing focused, and the podcast was one of those attempts. And I just wanted to mention before we, I guess, really roll into it, that we're at the moment actually hiring for a marketing and communications coordinator internally, or looking for someone who's going to help us internally as well as engage with clients. So this episode goes out Thursday morning, and the deadline for applications is actually Friday afternoon, or Friday close of business. So if you're listening to this and you enjoy podcasting, you enjoy just marketing, please, we'll have a link in the description. Check it out and please apply. But that's a nice segue to talking about podcasting more specifically. Now, we're celebrating a year since we started the podcast. I feel like we've learned a lot in the last 12 months.
Oh, yeah. Compared to where we were, to where we are now, it's night and day.
Yeah, I would hope so. At least.
Yeah. You do anything for a year, you hope you're at least all right at it.
Yeah. We've started uploading videos to YouTube recently. That was something that I meant to do a long time ago, but time is always the problem, and it requires its own sort of videos onto YouTube is a whole other world, a whole other thing. But I'm glad that we finally hopped onto that. But over the last 12 months, how's it been for you? Like, what are some things you've picked up over the last 12 months, Hayden?
I think it's always interesting when you consume a type of media and then, you end up creating it. And I think it would be the same as a person who critiques music or just listens to music generally and then tries to make their own album. I think you would look at your critiques from when you were just a consumer a lot differently, and knowing like the process of it, what it takes from getting, whether it be a guest on or just, recording something to then publishing it, to then promoting it, how, complex that can often be and how time consuming it is. It really gives you an appreciation for podcasting, and especially the people who do it really well.
There are a lot of podcasts, I think, podcasts that are quite simply put together, but to me, the biggest sort of appreciation is for those podcasts that, like storytelling ones, where there's a lot of music, there's a lot of characters.
I think a good one, and actually I listened to it on your recommendation, was Business Wars by Wondery.
Yes, Wondery make a whole bunch of podcasts.
Yeah. And I think what I appreciate about these podcasts is they actually have people who their whole job in terms of podcast production is literally just researching topics. It's, doing the informational deep dive to get an interesting story.
Fact-checking, stuff like that.
To be able to tell a story that could be done in 5 minutes over a 5-hour podcast. And whether or not you like that is sort of subjective. I know a lot of people, that's sort of why they don't like podcasts, because they are a bit long-winded. But yeah, I mean, I say all that to say it's been really interesting being on the other side of that and seeing, how hard it is to reach that level of podcast production or content creation.
I mean, obviously we continue to strive to be as good as we can, but like you put in 10 hours a week into it. I put in a few hours on top of that. It's a lot of work, but let's talk about the pros of, we knew that it was not going to be easy. We didn't sort of pick podcasting because we looked at all these different marketing channels and mediums and thought, oh, this one will be the easiest to get into. But we also identified a lot of positives. I mean, you're a podcast consumer, like a really avid consumer.
Yeah.
I am the same. So we obviously identified some pros, and I think it'd be unfair not to speak about just how the positives around podcasting. For me, for example, is that you can listen to a podcast like a lot of people used to listen to radio, just as sort of a thing in the background.
Yeah.
Obviously, it changes depending on how informational the podcast is, where you want to sort of cling to every single word. But while driving, for example, a lot of podcasts, yes, they have ads, but if you compare radio ads and podcasting ads, I mean, a 30-minute podcast might have 1 or 2 ad breaks
that you can skip,
which you can't on radio.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a huge positive for me, is that you can just consume it while you're like traveling to work.
And that's a big thing, right? I think for me, I learn the best by either watching something or listening to something. I should be a bigger reader than I am. Unfortunately, I'm not. So the best way to keep updated with news, to learn about specific hobbies, to, all that sort of stuff is, as you said, on my 30-minute commute to work, to put it on, get someone who's an expert to give me the synopsis of it, give me the layman version of what's going on, and I stay informed, and, you can talk about it somewhat authoritatively with a person in your life.
Yeah. I've meant to do this sooner, and I'm going to do it tomorrow, but I think it's the New York Times do like a condensed sort of this day's worth of news. That's one thing that I've been meaning to consume. I try and do that on YouTube, but the benefit with a podcast is that it's just uploaded, condensed audio. I do it on YouTube, like I said, but that's driven around video, so it assumes that you can look at graphs or look at things. So that, for example, is just a quick way of, in my driving to work, getting all that info straight off the bat. What are some other positives that you can think of?
I think a positive, and this is sort of true, I think, of a lot of media now in the internet age, is you can really find things that appeal to you. Like if you have a niche interest, right? Something that's not broad. Say you're into video games, but you're not just into video games, you're into Nintendo games, and you're not just into Nintendo games, you're into this specific type of game.
Like retro Nintendo games.
Exactly right. Like there'll be podcasts
about it.
And, if you're into technology more generally, there are podcasts out there that will give you deep dives into all the new tech that's coming out and get really into the weeds about technical specifications and stuff like that. And that's basically true with anything now. I mean, I think people have a misconception about podcasts that they are all either true crime podcasts or news podcasts. But really, I think what I like about them is that, if you're into, electronic music, there'll be one that's talking about that.
Just specifically for it.
If you are into, international relations and politics, like that part of the news, like there's something for you there.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a bit of like a pro and a con as well, though, in that the barrier to entry is a little bit low for podcasting. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think for the last little while of doing this, what we've picked up is that, yes, you can start with a very low barrier to entry, very low cost, very low time commitment. But to get it really good, it takes 10, 15 hours of work per like 1 hour episode. But I guess the con with that is that a lot of people also just do podcasting that's like recording off their phone. I've seen that comment happen a lot.
Yeah.
Or people sort of saying, there's nothing stopping you from podcasting, just pick up your phone.
Yeah.
So perhaps it takes a little bit of filtering. I mean, Anchor, for example, is a completely free hosting service. And there are a lot of, there's that low barrier to entry is a pro and a con in that you might get lackluster stuff. But simultaneously, you could actually uncover someone who's very insightful, informative with their information as well, I guess.
I think that sort of, I don't actually think it hurts the platform itself. I don't think that being flooded with bad podcasts just because of the law of averages, in terms of how many good podcasts there are for bad ones is a bad thing. I think it just puts more impotence on Spotify and Apple podcasts to really curate their stuff better. I mean, it's sort of like the App Store problem, right? Where it's like, the best thing about the App Store is that you have a $100 development kit and you can create an app. But the problem that has is, you create a really good app. How do you get eyes on it without paying for advertising or like specific App Store placement? So it does become...
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's sort of the same with, I guess, video, everything. I'm sure there are bad YouTubers. So that is a fair point. Yeah.
But, I mean, in general, I think the low barrier to entry, I don't really am a big fan of it. I think it sort of takes away the power from traditional media outlets that, typically want to create safe content that's very, appealing to a mass market.
Yeah, which stops the niche stuff that you were talking about from happening.
Exactly. I mean, like...
You can't make a business case for something very, very niche, but if your investments are very low but you're really passionate about it, well, the business case isn't so difficult to make anymore. And perhaps, you just uncover someone who's really good at what they, like, who really loves 90s Nintendo games and talking about them is really insightful. So, perhaps it's just so low barrier to entry that it creates sort of that benefit of you can just hear from really awesome people.
Yeah. I also think that low barrier to entry sort of, I think it sort of gives credence to the fact that the barrier to entry is so low that starting a podcast isn't that huge of an investment, which especially if you're not just a single entity trying to create a podcast, like you are tasked with creating it for a company or something. I think that's why you can sort of justify it a bit more, because if you are like a company who's like, thinking of it, looking into it, I mean, you could get a podcast done for pretty cheap.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to really strip it back and not make it like a whole...
Yeah, you can outsource the editing, you can record it yourself.
Yeah.
Even if you hire someone, you can probably get someone from like a school kid almost to hop on board. Obviously, you're not going to get a whole lot of quality, but it's cheaper than probably getting a videographer. I mean, video camera equipment alone, or like video equipment, would be quite a big investment.
Yeah.
I think that's a decent segue into quickly touching on the equipment that we use.
Yeah.
I think the biggest cost for us has been this microphone, the HyperX Quadcast, which we'll link to. Obviously, everything that we talk about we'll link to in the description, as with every single episode. The microphone was a big one. I think a lot of people would have a laptop or a device that they can record on.
Yeah.
I've heard of people editing and recording on iPads.
Yeah.
Which, even that again lowers the rung of what you need. Like, good luck editing a video on an older iPad.
Yeah.
You could probably spend $1,500 on an iPad that could edit video, but that's besides the point. So, talking about that sort of cost, it's again quite low, quite I guess palatable, because especially nowadays with COVID and Zoom calls, I've been using this awesome mic for Zoom calls, and I've been told that I'm coming across really clearly and really nicely, which is another benefit. So I think you can justify that pretty well, and I would think that these sorts of like microphones would hold value pretty well. It's not like, there's a new microphone every 6 months like you get with cameras and phones that then devalues a microphone. Like, a good quality microphone is a good quality microphone.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's sort of the ideology I hold with podcasting, where I don't think hyper good quality is very important. Like, we're not sound engineers by any means. We are not like producing music that, like needs to be...
That's technically just beautiful.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But I think that getting your audio to a certain level, to a certain acceptable level where, you would listen to it as a consumer and be like, yep, this is fine. Like, all the audio is like normalized. Like,
there's not too much background noise.
Yeah, there's not just like the annoying stuff that, would indicate to a consumer or to a listener that, this is a pretty low production venture. Maybe I'll come back when they actually put some money or time into it.
Well, if they've even lasted that long. It could just seem like, a hobby. Like, again, I've heard podcasts of people, you can tell that they've recorded on a phone.
Yeah.
Probably sitting in a car because you can hear sort of traffic going past. And that maybe sends the wrong message, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But I think what's funny about it though is like a lot of the big podcasts I listen to, and like these are huge podcasts, I won't like say them out by name, but like they record in a studio or record in a house, and you can hear like police sirens going off in the background. You can see quite clearly that there's like background noise, but they sort of leave it in because the voices are coming through clearly enough, and they edit it live. And
perhaps it speaks to the authenticity. Is that how you sort of look at it, or is it?
I think
annoying.
I think it's sort of what you and I have discussed, where it's like, is the marginal benefit of me editing out, like spending an hour trying to edit out this background noise, worth the marginal
the benefits of not hearing it?
It's like, well, the cost of me is going to take an hour to go through an hour and a half episode and like try to make the audio as good as possible. Is it worth that, like, my hourly wage to to the consumer? Like, that's sort of where you have to balance it out. And it's like, with video, I think it's a bit more important, because if you have like a poorly edited video, and
it really tells.
It really does tell. Like, and you can see the people who are content creators first and like editors second versus the other way around. And I think with podcasts, like the content is key, and having a microphone that's serviceable is like...
Yeah, and don't get us wrong, I don't think you have to invest... I can't remember how much this was, but it was probably around $300, I want to say, or $400.
Yeah.
And that's Australian dollars. Probably like costs a third of that in the US, or probably a quarter of that, just because of the Australian technology tax. But I think you can get very serviceable microphones for like $20, $30. As long as you're smart about it. Hop on Amazon, look for reviews. I think the huge message here is that getting a dedicated microphone almost always is better than using an inbuilt microphone. Whether that's in earphones or whether that's on a device. And that's sort of a nice segue into two different points that I want to make that you've picked up on. Is guests who hop on podcasts with a microphone on like an inbuilt mic, and they type away, and you sort of hear that sort of really boomy, thudding sort of noise.
I mean, that's sort of the most disappointed I've ever been, like, creating the podcast, has been when we have a guest on. They're awesome, they're really enthusiastic, great content, great talking points, but they've gotten like a wired iPhone headphone as like, their audio source, and they've forgotten that to like take out like the, the voice, what would you call it, like the voice like input? Like from the microphone. And so the audio is terrible.
And it like bumps into their clothing,
or like brushes their beard, and it just creates like annoying static. And so I think that's like a big problem, because obviously we're a guest-based show. That's the biggest problem we run into constantly, where almost it's our best guests sometimes have had the worst equipment, and it's ended up like being like an episode that I'm not particularly like happy with, just because I know how good it could have been,
especially given the quality of content, like you're saying, like just awesome value, but they've just missed out on those things. And there's a limit, because again, we could talk about like a lot of your time is also spent trying to get guests on the podcast, especially being more Australia focused now. We've found that people aren't, it's not that they need to be like really, really convinced to come on, but they're much less familiar with it. And it takes a bit more work to find guests and then find good quality guests.
Yeah, I think like two things on that point. I think coronavirus, funnily enough, has been the best thing to happen for the production of our show, just because we do guests, we interview guests over Zoom, and now that Zoom has been pretty much adopted by every workplace imaginable, people are more familiar with it. They understand what makes good audio on Zoom, what equipment they should be using, etc., etc. But I think like even bigger than having the good equipment is finding a guest who actually wants to come on your show and talk to you about the things that you want to talk about, and it's not just in it for self-promotion. I think one piece of advice, if you are running like a guest-based show, is to really vet the people who are coming on like really well. And so if you're going to like a podcast guest group, and you'll get hundreds of responses from people who want to come on, but a lot of them are people who have content marketing firms, and all they want to do
is like a new book coming out,
etc. And all of their appearance is basically a thinly veiled advertisement for the product they're trying to shill. And it's really hard to determine sometimes, because that's how these guys are really good at it.
Yeah, I mean, they know what they're doing. This isn't sort of the first time they're trying to convince a podcast manager or a podcast producer that they deserve to be a guest.
Yeah.
I think what's interested me is like where we've booked in an episode, and then I get an email saying, "Hi Germaine, I'm looking forward to this episode with us. These are some questions you might want to ask me." And I'm like, and I get that. I get that if you're inexperienced or not so confident, you'd just say, "Fair enough, Hayden, thank you, I'll ask those questions." But you've got to be really careful in vetting them. I mean, my response has been, "Thank you, I appreciate that. Just so you know, here's the list of the questions that we will be discussing."
Yeah.
I might try and ask some of those questions, but only if it makes sense, only if it's logical. We're not a platform for you to market. I think I've heard of podcasts that, and fair enough, but there are podcasts that charge money to be on the episode just because they can, I guess, and they have the reach. You've got to be careful, I guess, both sides, that the guest isn't just trying to promote something, and the podcaster just isn't trying to make money, because I think podcasting, and touching on niche stuff as well, like it's almost a passion project, I think.
Yeah, I think for some people, but I think you touched on an interesting point where it's sort of like the value exchange, where if a big guest is coming on your show, should they expect some money back from you, or vice versa, if you're going on their show with a huge reach?
Yeah, should you be paying?
I mean, but it is interesting because there was a music A&R, I forget his name, and he was basically saying that a lot of young artists now will refuse to go on podcasts or stuff like that unless they're paid money.
Right.
They won't go on a Joe Rogan experience unless they see some of the ad revenue, or basically show revenue from that. And there's like a big discussion about that, because basically you got one camp saying, that's right, if you're a guest-based show, like this is basically...
Well, if you're sort of leveraging the guest's reach for your podcast's growth, yeah, fair enough.
But the other camp is sort of saying that you'd be stupid to, forego an opportunity to go on like the Joe Rogan podcast, because like you've seen people like Jordan Peterson and these other guys like make full careers out of being, featured on these platforms, and then be able to like monetize that,
leverage that, grow that.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it is interesting.
Maybe it's a sign that podcasting is sort of reaching prime time. That, because the beauty with podcasting is that it's a funny one, because it's not like it's low barrier to entry. You can it's audio. There's not like one authority on it, and that's why I think Spotify invested so much into podcasting.
Yeah.
Because they're trying to become the authority, but no one sort of claimed it. Like for video, you go to YouTube. For like short text stuff, you go to Twitter.
Yeah.
For everything, you go to Facebook. For
Yeah.
images, you go to like Pinterest
Mm.
or Instagram. No one owns. I'm sure some people would say, Apple Podcasts, but
Not really.
not really.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't really like own because Apple Podcasts is just a way to. It's almost the vehicle and not the originator of podcasts, because podcasts are hosted with podcast hosts.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think Apple is funny enough because just like the App Store, they've sort of fallen arse backwards into becoming the premier podcast hosting platform, just like they did with the App Store, where it's they have put no effort into making it the best place for creators. They have put no effort into making it the most optimized way to grow your audience. They've just said, hey, our platform is the most ubiquitous. Here's a podcast app. You'd be stupid not to distribute on our platform.
It's just sort of fallen into it. I mean, there are signs that, Apple, for example, this is the thing, it's always a war, right? Google owns search, for example.
Yeah.
You want to search something, you go to Google. There's always these battles like browser wars. There's always battles to become the place for something. And Apple, from what I've heard and what I've read and what I've seen, is trying to become the place for podcasts. I personally, one big flaw with it is that I'm an Android phone user.
Yeah.
Straight off the bat, there's no Apple app, Apple Podcasts app.
Yeah.
I think they're silly not to just make an Apple Podcast app for Android. What stops them from doing that? And then just look at Apple Podcasts, like you said, as a distribution channel, not as one of the ways to listen to podcasts if you're on an iPhone. It's a whole channel in and of itself. Like iTunes was for a long time. People used to launch on iTunes.
Yeah.
That was it. You know, you sold your song for $1.99 or 99 cents, sold an album for $9.99 or whatever it was, and they did a really good job of that. And I think they're perhaps trying to do it, but I think it speaks for the democracy of podcasting.
Yeah.
That someone like Apple or even Spotify haven't been able to just nail it down as their domain.
Yeah, and I think the problem is, and I think maybe why Apple hasn't invested so aggressively as Spotify, is because really, in my mind, the reason Spotify is doing it, not to own the podcast realm, but because podcasting is intrinsically linked to their music platform, which is where they make the bulk of their money. So, the reason why Spotify pays so much money to get these exclusivity deals is it forced me to download Spotify. I'm an Apple Music guy. Just because I've been grandfathered in, I don't really think about it. I get a cheap deal, it is whatever. But I have to download it now. And now that I've downloaded the app, I'm one step closer to
becoming a paying
exactly
Spotify client.
Because you don't actually have to pay Spotify to listen to podcasts. It's part of their free version. You don't.
Yeah, we would. It would be stupid because very few podcasts actually cost money to listen to. So you would just go to Stitcher or something if you wanted to just listen to podcasts.
Exactly.
So they're giving it to you for free.
Yeah, and I think Apple, in terms of the music industry, which is I think way still and will continue to be way more lucrative than the podcasting industry, because they're so synonymous with music, that I think that that's not the avenue that they take to grow that side of their business.
Yeah.
I think they're much more interested in working with artists, music artists directly, to get exclusivity deals on that front, to get albums released early on
iTunes.
Yeah. But we'll see. It's I could be wrong. Podcasts could be overtake music in a while, but I just don't see that being the case.
Well, music is a much older form of entertainment, and podcasting, I guess, is radio hasn't died despite podcasting. I think sort of competing against that. So
I think there is an upper limit to it, though. I think,
as in a limit to how much market penetration podcasting or listening to podcasts.
Yeah, it's Joe Rogan is the, not to keep bringing up this guy, but
well, he's the biggest podcast.
But he's the biggest in the world. It's he would generate a lot of money, an undoubted lot of money, but you compare him to Drake.
Yeah.
In terms of Drake's music career would be subsidizing 20 artists who you all love, and you wouldn't even know it because he generates that much money from music.
Yeah.
Whereas Joe Rogan, it's
I mean, $200 million in like a Drake sort of money or Kanye sort of money
Yeah.
isn't massive.
No, it's not. Like
It's big in podcasting, and that 200 mil would have been over a long period of
yeah, I believe
time.
it's. I mean, don't quote me on this. It's above 5 years. I believe it's 7 years.
Right.
So like,
Yeah.
I mean, still a lot of money, but like
it's a lot of money, and that's not what we're talking down. It's just that in the grand scheme of things, especially when it comes to entertainment,
Yeah.
which podcasting is,
Yeah.
And I would argue that almost anything is these days is entertainment at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's not crazy.
No.
Um,
No, definitely not. And like, but I think as I said, it's interesting that that's now the ceiling, you know, just in the same way that like if LeBron James gets a contract, like that now becomes the benchmark for this is what the top, you know, athlete gets paid. This is what the top basketball player gets paid, you know.
Yeah.
And now that we have a figure for that, it's really interesting to see where the other chips sort of fall.
Yeah.
In terms of like, if Joe Rogan is worth, you know, $20, $30 million a year, what is the show that, you know, pulls in 500,000 like viewers a month?
Yeah, what sort of a dollar figure around that?
Yeah.
I mean, podcasting almost shoots themselves in the foot because you can skip advertising.
I mean, yes and no. I think you're right in the fact that it does stop you from doing that, but in the same way, like you can skip YouTube ads.
But YouTube, like Google, forces you to watch ads every once in a while as well.
It does, but I mean, like,
not the whole.
You can get ad blocker, like.
Yeah, true. I mean, I guess as a afterthought for all that, YouTube revenue's been sort of on the downward sort of trend
for creators.
For creators.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it does bring up sort of this interesting business case because looking at us and the podcast that you're listening to at the moment, this isn't a profitable, like if we were looking at this solely as a business like expense and a return on investment, one, it's very hard to tie a return on investment. I think it's we can't point to like a single client who said, oh yeah, I listen to your podcast, that's why I'm working with you.
Yeah.
So, you know, look at direct sort of attribution, I think it's not profitable.
Yeah.
Saying that doesn't mean that I personally as the business owner don't value your efforts and value podcasting though.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of what I wanted to bring up at the top of the show. It's podcasting in general. There is, just because I think of how much of a time investment there is, I mean, you can like listen to 20 music artists in your phone in the same time that you listen to one podcast. I mean, there's just not enough hours in the day to listen to every podcast you may or may not be interested in. And I think as a result, a lot less people can do podcasting full time or create a podcast for their company that's really like generating revenue. But in saying that, I think it does have a lot of like intangible benefits.
For sure. I mean, one thing I've really enjoyed with it is just being able to reach out and talk to new people, understand new people from all over the world.
Yeah.
You mentioned that we do it on Zoom. That just literally means that geography or geographical locations don't matter, which is just really awesome.
Yeah. But I think you know, speaking from your perspective as like a business owner, like I feel like a podcast, while it is hard to judge the benefits that it's giving you directly in terms of like, you know, return on investment that you can like note down in like accounting terms.
Yeah.
But like just quickly for like people at home like who might not know, like there are a whole heap of like SEO benefits.
Yeah, I mean, if you're transcripting the podcast, for example, you use Descript.
Yeah, Descript. We used Happy Scribe for a little bit.
Not so happy with them.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah. No, but Descript was definitely like a step up, and Descript actually gives you some audio and video editing capabilities like in the app, so you can sort of kill two birds with one stone.
Saying that, we also use Audacity, which is completely free. To record and edit.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure the Adobe Suite, if you have that, actually has
Adobe Audition.
Yeah. So
which is an audio tool.
Again, really cheap to do a lot of this stuff, and it can have a lot of benefits. And if you're like a big brand that has, you know, a plugged-in consumer base that you can sort of like launch a podcast off, it's really a good way to become sort of an authority in your industry and sort of be known as like as a trusted source of information. I mean, I was talking to my mate who basically works at a paralegal as a law firm, and he eventually wants to like work at the law firm full time, and he's like sort of been tasked with creating their podcast as well. So
wow.
Yeah, so I was talking to him about it, and I was talking about like how weird it is that like law firms and even, you know, consulting companies are like starting their own podcasts. But it does sort of make sense in the fact that, I mean, how many law firms besides like Malagana said can you like...
Whichever in Canberra, you would know their ads. It's comedy. It's just TV.
Yeah. I mean,
they
like,
really own that.
You know, like one.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, Bloomers, they do. They do funny ads as well.
And these are like some of the best ads that like we've ever seen, and I think that's what it takes for you to know a law firm.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I hope to never know like a law firm.
Yeah, because it's never good news if you need a law firm.
Yeah, but like if you start a podcast that sort of talks about the law industry in general, gives like tips on how to handle this, how to handle that.
Yeah, just simple stuff.
Yeah. You become like an authority within that world. You instantly, your brand becomes more salient to consumers. They're aware of you. They're aware.
Yeah, and it's a younger person's sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Podcasting.
Yeah.
But older people can hop into it without any sort of high barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Because good audio is good audio. People listen to music. People listen to radio all the time. So it really is a nice way to get into it. And it's low investment, high reward if you just continue that. You can, you know, transcribe the conversations, which is really good for SEO, because when you post it on your blog, put the transcription. That's just an awesome way to get a whole lot of words that are still relevant. So you're not just coming up with sort of pointless words.
Yeah.
That helps you focus in and target in on specific topics.
Yeah.
And it just makes everything awesome.
Yeah, and from an advertising perspective, if you are a person who is looking to advertise on a podcast, obviously Germaine brought up a big problem that people can skip your ads pretty easily. But I think the counter argument to that is that if you're selling a very niche product, like say you are selling a home security system, right? Like, where do you really advertise that? Where are your consumers going to, you know, see this? Whereas like, if you listen to True Crime Podcast, every ad is like, do you want an easy to install like security system? And it's like, when do you want a security system more than when you're listening to like the Golden State Murderer? And you're like, oh my God.
Like someone who just like got burgled.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're, that's a very good point. You can really niche down. Like if you sell, there's a lot of those retro small portable consoles coming out.
Yeah.
That this Nintendo, I'm sure this retro Nintendo gaming podcast that we use as an example exists. We don't know the name of it, but I'm sure it has to exist.
Yeah, sure.
But what a way to, you know, advertise your product, because your markets are ready for that. If you tell them you can use your cartridges and play Pokemon again on the go, well, good. Like that's just the best way to do it. If you're looking at Facebook or something like that, good luck.
Yeah, and that's sort of the thing. Like, I think people default to these platforms that have a really widespread, but have people who are just not interested in buying the stuff that you're selling, like, and have become so numb to seeing like advertisements on there. It's sort of like, you know, just don't pick it up.
I don't pick it up. Like
No.
I when I watch or go through blog posts and stuff, or the internet, I miss advertising altogether. I just don't notice it anymore. So, I mean, on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of the podcast. Thanks for joining me, Hayden. Thanks everyone for listening. It's been, like we said, 12 months. We look forward to seeing what we can do with this podcast and having better, more guests for you in the future. I think before we finish off, one last thing. I want to talk about my favorite episode. I don't know if you have one, but mine's been the quite recent one with Jared from Jared's Tech. Just because I love technology. I'm a total geek inside, and I love YouTube. I'm an avid YouTube consumer and an avid podcast consumer. So that's been my favorite episode. We'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. How about you, Hayden? What's been your favorite?
It's a hard one, but I would have to say the episode we did with Pip. I don't want to say her last name because
Rasmussen.
Rasmussen. So she's we'll link that one. She is basically a person who sort of like maneuvered her way into like the presenting music host sort of industry, which is very hard to get into if you've ever like, you know,
Even thought about it, yeah.
Yeah, because again, like not to bring up another mate, but like a mate is trying to like basically do that. And he said it's like extremely hard, and he's sort of like got everything riding on like an internship that he's doing.
Right.
And
So for free.
Yeah, like
a
a free like internship with like Spotify that he could like sort of finagle into something else. But like it's just interesting to see like how she talks about that space, because I feel like there's not a lot of like actual like information about how to
get into it,
get in and follow that career path. Even, you know, so that was like an awesome episode, and Pip's like was real good on the camera, was real good like talking.
You can tell that she's got experience.
Yeah, and she was just super cool lady. So yeah, that was probably
lady. I'm not sure that people would like to hear that.
A super cool person. Super cool person. I take it back.
Super cool chick.
Yeah,
There you go. Awesome.
Super cool
that
queen.
was very lame, but we'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening, guys. As always, everything's going to be in the description down below. We'll see you next episode.